Holocaust survivor and personal storyteller Sidney Finkel discovered a second career in personal healing when he started telling his childhood experiences of the Nazi occupation of Poland with Chicago area junior and senior high school students. "I can't understand it," Mr. Finkel says of his students' intense interest, "but I have a story that these young people want to hear." That story begins in 1939, when 7-year-old Sevek Finkelstein and his family, being forced by the German occupiers of Poland to move into a bleak, overcrowded Jewish ghetto. What followed in tragic succession were the deaths of his mother and 2 of his sisters, forced labor for Sevek and his father, and eventually the Buchenwald concentration camp, where his father died. The day before the Allies liberated Buchenwald, Sevek, among hundreds of prisons, were taken on a 10-mile death march and then shipped in an open railroad to cars to Czechoslovakia. Sevek survived those horrors and a severe case of typhus. He was reunited with his older brother and sister, and then, in 1945, was evacuated to England. He was 13 years old, illiterate, and emotionally scarred. Yet by 1951, he was able to immigrate to the United States. In Chicago, he married, raised a family, and worked 40 years as a retail salesman and manager. And all the while, he was silent about his Holocaust experiences. Only when his adult daughter insisted did Sevek Finkelstein, now Sidney Finkel, begin to talk, haltingly, with gaps of memory and painful feelings. A family visit to the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. opened the floodgates of memory and emotion. Then his son's request that Sidney talk to some 9th graders started the storytelling. Connecting their age with Sidney's at the time of his tale, students were appalled, inspired, and curious. Their frank questions and his unwaveringly honest answers, at times with shame for his own past behaviors, were healing for Sidney and riveting for his listeners, including those at St. Xavier University who gathered at the invitation of Professor Avis Clendenin to hear Sidney speak and to reflect on the lessons within his experiences. Those lessons, as Mr. Finkel notes them in Sevek and the Holocaust, the boy who refused to die, concern, quote, the consequences of hatred and prejudice, the need for tolerance, compassion, and forgiveness, and the courage to stand up for what is good and right. They are lessons that echo St. Xavier University's mission to educate students to serve wisely and compassionately in support of human dignity and the common good. For these and other pertinent reasons, we are most pleased to confer on Sidney Finkel the degree of Doctor of Humane Letters, honoris causa, with all the rights and privileges thereof, done at Chicago, Illinois, the 17th day of December, 2011.
At this time, Mr. Finkel will provide the commencement address.
Thank you very much. Boy, what a fantastic moment this is for me. You know, I'm pretty imaginative, but I never ever thought in any way that I could possibly be standing here before you, who are the most important people in this room, are you, and I'm so happy to be here to congratulate you. I also want to thank the President, Weiss, and the Professor Glendinson, who sponsored me. She sent a letter, and we figured that it would be 2-3 years, but then within 3 weeks, she sent me an email addressed to me as, "Congratulations, Dr. Finkel." It was just absolutely great. I also want to thank my family, especially my wife, Jean. Where are you, Jean? I've been married to her for 48 years. She's absolutely my inspiration. Without her support and her love, I know I wouldn't be standing here for sure, but a lot of worse things would have happened to me. Yeah. My children, who's always fought for me and so encouraging in my work, and especially my grandchildren. I just love my grandchildren. That's the best part of going older, is to have grandchildren. Some people say skip the children and go right to the grandchildren. And also I have a great-grandson here, right here in the room too. He's the light of our eyes right there. Hi. I'm going to tell you just a slight amount of my story. In 1944, when I was 13 years old, and I've already been in the camps, in the slave labor camp, the war was coming to an end, and the Nazis took me, my father, and my brother, and they pushed us into a cattle car and began a 3-day journey to a concentration camp in Germany called Buchenwald. When I got there, I was absolutely covered with lice, just everywhere. But we were processed there, and there was another prisoner that would cut up all my hair, and he would dunk his brush in a bucket, and he would paint me in some chemical to disinfect me. And then we went into the showers, but everybody began to cry, and I just didn't know why. And they told me that they were afraid that instead of water coming out from the shower heads, there would be gas, because we had heard the stories. But it was luckily, and this wonderful feeling came over me when I felt warm water, actually warm water, come from the shower heads. We were put into a barrack. You see, there was the big camp, very large camp, with about 50,000 people. Then they made a smaller camp within the big camp that was exclusively for Jews. So they dumped us in there, and these conditions were just awful. There was no sanitation. The water would only run just a few hours a day. Corpses were lined up everywhere. They were stacked like lumber. People had lost their control over their bodily function, and we would have not survived. But in the darkest of darkness, there's always some light. And you might say that God's presence is there, because other prisoners that were there for a very long time, and they were like administrators of the camp, they took pity on us and took us and put us into the big camp, where conditions there were much, much better. We got more food, and we also were protected. We had to stay on roll call for hours at a time. And looking in front of me, just maybe a couple hundred yards, there was the gate that opened up and allowed the Nazis to come through those gates. I could look beyond it, and I would see such normality, such people. And here I was fenced in like a bird in a cage, except that it was barbed wire, electrified fences, and guard towers every few hundred yards. Going back, or up front rather, a little bit, this year in April, I received an invitation to come to Buchenwald for the 66th anniversary of the liberation of the camp. So I was at first excited, but as the time drew near for me to go, I felt very, very nervous. You know, what would I do? How would I feel? I couldn't back off because my son, Leon, and my daughter, Ruth, and of course my wife, all were going to this camp, so I wouldn't be alone. I would have a real good support system. So when we got there, I think the first few days I was just basically angry at the Nazis, like how could they do this to me? But yet I said, to hell with them. I'm alive and I'm doing well. There was a day where we went into the office with a historian, and he was able to actually produce records for me, my father, and my uncle and my brother, actual records. The Germans kept order. They loved to write everything down. They wouldn't take any chance on anything. And the strange thing is I'm sitting there in this conference room. This historian is pushing all these papers, not towards me, but towards my daughter and son. I said, what's going on? But then I realized what was happening. You see, my history now became their history. And I did my job, you know. I am very, very grateful that God has given me the opportunity so late in my life to be able to tell my stories. And I can't tell you what a privilege it is to look at your faces and see your energy and have somebody like me who, I'm getting a doctorate degree, I would have just settled on the undergraduate degree. I would be very happy with that, you know. I got my GED when I was 55 years old. So you can just imagine what a feeling, almost like my skin is moving, and the emotions and the feelings. And I know that what St. Xavier's has done is not just for me, it's really representing the people that cannot be here in front of you, like my mother, my sister, my brother. And this is one of the reasons I speak, is that when I do, I feel their presence, you know, and I honor them. So congratulations again. I know you have a wonderful future. You're energetic, you're bright, you're even good looking. And I wish you nothing but success and have joy in life. May you have joy in your life. Thank you.